Maybe your church has been live streaming for the past few years using a simple system, a small video switcher, maybe a couple budget-friendly cameras, and you've been wondering, what would it take for us to take the video quality of our live stream to the next level? Do we need to get more bigger cameras? Do we need a fancier video switcher? Do we need a dolly and a jib and all these cool fancy tools that we see on Churchfront tech tours? If your church's live stream video quality is down here and a church like Bethel or Life Church, their quality is way up here, how do we close this gap without having to throw hundreds of thousands of dollars at an integration company to come solve the problem? I want to propose that what it takes to close this gap actually is not quite as expensive or inaccessible as most church leaders assume. Our team at Churchfront works with churches both small and big all across the country. Every day we're helping them take their live stream from mediocre to a pro level stream. And I wanted to share with you the 5 things that I continue to find myself repeating to worship leaders, tech directors, and pastors for how to take their stream from amateur to pro. And a lot of these tips not only improve video quality, but it's also going to make workflows more efficient and reliable. And keep in mind, video is only half of what makes up your live stream. Of course, we have the entire topic of audio. I could talk all day about it. We've made a ton of other videos about audio for your live stream. You can check them out on the channel. But in this video, I'm going to focus on helping you get the best bang for your buck when it comes to professional video for your stream. I'm going to be covering a lot of specific gear in this video, like camera bodies, lenses, other accessories for your live stream system. So check out the Worship Ministry Toolkit linked below this video. And then once you download the toolkit, go to the Advanced Live Streaming tab. One of the biggest mistakes I see churches making with their live stream has to do with missing the fundamentals of physics. I don't care how expensive your camera is. You can have a Canon C500 or a Sony Venice cinema camera or something insane. If that camera is not getting enough light, it will not look good. So do not miss this first crucial point. So here I have a Blackmagic camera. It's about $1,500 for the body. This lens is probably a $2,000 lens. So we're talking about a $3,500 to $4,000 setup. So here is what this camera looks like with the proper amount of light. Looks pretty great. Okay, now here's what this camera looks like when we don't have adequate front lighting on our stage. Looks like garbage. So I want to make this point clear to you. You can throw money all day at the camera and lens gear that I'm going to recommend later in this video, but if you don't get stage lighting right, it's not going to look good. Imagine telling a pro football player that they can go and play the game, but they can't have any oxygen. That's like telling a camera it can go and capture your footage, but it's not going to have any light. It's that fundamental to its performance. Fortunately, you can check out the other videos on our channel that go in depth on how to set up a proper lighting system for your church that's gonna look great in person and online. Just don't skip that step. So what are the camera specs that actually matter when it comes to selecting the right setup for your church's live stream? Well, I think it comes mostly down to the camera sensor and the lens. So if you compare the parts of a camera to the anatomy of a human eye, the sensor of a camera is similar to the retina of your eye. It's the part of the eye that receives the light data that then gets sent to your brain to create the image. So on a camera, the light hits the sensor, and that's how the camera is able to capture the original source data, which it then processes into the image. So the larger the sensor you have, the more data your camera can capture, which is going to result in a clearer and a much better image. Now let's talk about the lens. Same concept as what's going on in the human eye. Your eye has a lens, which is responsible for the field of view that you can see, how wide or narrow your field of view is. And then it also determines the focus of the image. What is your eye actually focusing on, and the sharpness of the image. So the same concept going on here. Your eye has an iris, which is the little muscle or piece of your eye that expands or contracts to let in more or less light. In the same way, a lens has an iris, which also lets in more or less light. Not only does that affect the brightness of the image, but it also can affect the depth of field in your image. So for most professional video situations, you're gonna end up purchasing a lens separate from the camera body. And this can introduce a whole host of questions of which one is right for your church and your specific camera in your camera plot around your worship center. So let's actually go through a few specific examples and recommendations so you have some direction here. I recommend getting an image sensor on a camera body that is a minimum of micro 4/3 in size. So this is a Blackmagic Pocket 4K camera. It's got a micro 4/3 sensor on it. And this is about the smallest I would recommend when it comes to sensor size. After micro 4/3, there's also APS-C, which is a little bit bigger. And then we have the Blackmagic 6K, which has a super 35mm sensor, which is then a little bit bigger. And then here is an example of a full frame, and you can see how much bigger this camera sensor is. This is the Sony a7S III. This is actually the camera we use for a lot of the creative videos here at Churchfront, but it also can make a great professional live streaming broadcast camera as well. Micro 4/3, APS-C, Super 35, full frame. Those are the terms you're looking for if you're considering a camera, especially a mirrorless camera, for your live stream setup. The reason why I find myself often recommending the Blackmagic line of cameras for churches is because they are so cost effective. So much value is packed into this camera body for the price tag being under $2,000. So here's a pocket cinema camera, and then probably even better for a church live streaming environment is the newer 4K studio cameras by Blackmagic. They have the Plus model and the Pro model. This is the Plus model. It's extremely cost effective. And what's great for a broadcast environment is you have practical things like this larger LCD screen. So it's easier for your camera operators to see what's going on, to see what's in focus. So this is definitely a great camera if its only job is pretty much to live within your church worship center and capture for live stream. These other cinema cameras by Blackmagic are great if you want them to be able to also do other creative projects at your church, like make sermon videos or announcement videos or different things like that. Another thing you need to consider when it comes to purchasing the camera bodies is the lens mount. So here we've got a micro 4/3 camera, the Pocket 4K, and then we have a micro 4/3 lens. And what's nice about the micro 4/3 ecosystem of lenses is they're cost effective. They're also smaller. Look at the difference. This is a full frame sensor lens, E-mount, and this is a micro 4/3 for the Blackmagic. And just very stark difference in the size of the lenses. And again, the cost for micro 4/3 is gonna be down there. But then we have the Blackmagic 6K camera, and this one has a Super 35 sensor with an EF lens mount. So EF is for the Canon professional lenses. Here's an L lens, and this is a nice 70 to 200 camera. It's great in a lot of churches for your main follow cam. If your room is too long, you'll probably want something with a farther throw. But these are some really amazing sharp lenses, have amazing autofocus capability and stabilization built into them, but you're going to pay quite a bit more for these lenses. Another important thing to consider when you're building out your multi-camera system is, do you want to be able to use different lenses by utilizing the functionality of a speed booster? This speed booster device allows me to put an EF mount lens onto a micro 4/3 camera body. So just because you get all micro 4/3 cameras, let's say you go with all of these Blackmagic Studio 4K cameras, it doesn't mean you can't use the nice EF lens by Canon. So you can actually get a speed booster, you can then put the speed booster onto the lens, and now this will go onto this camera, no problem, and it's good to go. Keep in mind though, sometimes these speed boosters and the way that they work with the body and lens, there can be some limited functionality in some of the controls of the lens. So just keep that in mind as you add speed boosters on. And I think this is probably a cheaper one, which eliminates our ability to actually control the iris on this lens, but we just work around that inconvenience. So I could talk all day about the different camera bodies out there, which ones you could use for your live streaming setup. I really like cameras by Panasonic, like the GH6 line of cameras. Sony, I love the a7S III cameras, or some of their even higher end compact cinema cameras. You've got amazing cameras by Red, like the Komodo. I'm seeing that used more and more often. Or you've got the Canon cinema cameras. They're all amazing cameras. Like, you have no excuse for not finding a great camera for your church's setup other than budget, because they can get pretty pricey. But at the end of the day, they can all produce an amazing image. So I'll link all those cameras again in the Worship Ministry Toolkit. We've talked about camera bodies enough. Now let's talk a little bit more about lenses. And here are a few important things to consider. And again, I'm gonna simplify this to keep the video brief. But a lens, obviously, it has the zoom capability, right? That's gonna affect your field of view. I can get a wide perspective, or I can zoom in for some tighter shots. And as you're shopping for the right focal length, that's what that's called, I would recommend getting an app like the Kadraj Director's Viewfinder app. It's an app, it costs a couple bucks on your phone, but you're gonna be able to simulate what different lenses look like on different camera bodies using your phone's camera in Viewfinder. So it's a really handy app if you're wondering. I get this question all the time. Jake, what lens should I get for my camera that's, at this place in my building? Well, I don't know. I don't know what it looks like to actually set up a camera body and lens in that specific spot in your church, but you can simulate it using that app. The other really important spec I want folks to consider when they're buying lenses is the aperture range. So with cameras, the simplest way for me to put this is that the lower you see the number for the f-stop, usually you'll see like f2.8, or sometimes there's a range of f2.8 to 4.5 or 6 point something. It really depends on the specific camera model. But the lower that number can go, like 2.8 or 1.8 or even 1.4, you're gonna have a very bright and fast lens. It's gonna give you a very shallow depth of field, and that's gonna help your image look clearer and actually more cinematic. So that's the spec to look for. It doesn't mean that every single one of your cameras needs to be at the lowest aperture, because that might not look creatively appropriate for the shot. You don't want a wide shot of your whole room to have a super tiny aperture, because then you're not gonna have everything in focus. Because the higher that number goes, like if it's f5 or 6 plus, then there's gonna be less light coming in, but more of the field of view is gonna be in focus. So I wanna show you what does this look like if I'm actually shopping here on B&H Photo. So I'm gonna go and just type in micro four thirds lenses, and I just want you guys to see how the specs of a camera lens can have an effect on price. So here we have a Panasonic Lumix lens, 12 to 35 millimeters. It's a wider field of view. Could work good for maybe capturing like a whole frame of your the congregation from the back of the room, or just some wider shots. And you can see that's a $700 lens. Sigma is always gonna have a bit more budget-friendly lenses. This one's a prime lens, so it's one focal length. That might, probably 16 millimeters actually is practically, I think, a little bit too wide for anything that's useful for a prime lens in a live stream environment. I'd probably look more for like maybe 35 or 50 millimeter in higher focal lengths, and those could be cool like stage roamer shots with that low f-stop that's gonna give you that cinematic look in the blurry background. Here we have the Panasonic Lumix 25 millimeter. Keep in mind, with micro four thirds to full frame, when you're comparing focal lengths, micro four thirds are gonna be cropped in more. So a 25 millimeter micro four thirds lens on a micro four thirds camera is gonna look more like a 50 millimeter lens on a Super 35 or full frame camera. Then we have the Panasonic Leica lenses, which are a bit more premium. The Leica is more premium brand here, and this is a 10 to 25, and again, it has that low f-stop, which is gonna increase the price. Here's an example of a cheaper lens, this 75 to 300, which you might be like, oh man, that's really cool. I can zoom in super far for a follow cam. Keep in mind that your f-stop is limited from 4.8 to 6.7. I think if you have enough front light on your subject on stage, this lens actually could work pretty well for that context. So look at the price. That one's only $600 or $550 compared to the Leica lens up here, which seemingly doesn't do as much, but it's like more than double the price. And then here's some examples of some very common Canon lenses. You've got the EF lenses. They also have the RF mount lenses. So if you go with like a Canon C70 camera, or some of their newer like R5C cameras. There's so many great options from Canon out there as well, but you can see you are paying quite the premium for the quality of glass that you get with their cameras. All these lenses have an f-stop that usually at least goes down to 2.8, and then the image is gonna be super sharp. One more thing I wanna touch on with cameras. I've talked a lot about mirrorless and more like cinema cameras, but you can also consider PTZ cameras. You guys know the story. I've never been a huge fan of PTZ cameras because of small sensors. But if you invest in the right PTZ cameras, like Canon CRN 500, the model that I have pulled up here. I tested that out. I made an in-depth video about it you can find on the channel. It has a 1-inch sensor and it has good Canon glass in it, so the image does look really great if you go with the CRN 500 model. Also, Bird Dog makes some great cameras. I haven't tried these myself. I've just heard a lot of great things about them, and I can see even by the specs, it's a 4K camera, but it has, more importantly, that 1-inch sensor inside of it. If you really feel like you need the capability of a camcorder, again, I wouldn't go with a cheap route with this because you are gonna pay heavily in the image quality that you get. So I would look into something like at least the Canon XF605 Ultra HD 4K HDR Pro camcorder, right? And you'll begin to see, if you have to invest this much for a quality image of a camcorder, that's why I often recommend churches go the route of something like the Pocket 4K setup with a micro four thirds lens. And I actually think you're gonna get a superior image quality out of that versus dropping $4,500 on a camcorder. But if you wanna go that route, this is something that I would recommend. If you'd like a comprehensive guide to building an advanced multi-camera live streaming system at your church, then check out the online course linked below. Our advanced live streaming course is going to walk you through in great detail how to pick the right cameras, how to use exposure settings, how to frame your shots properly, and train your video team. We're also gonna go in depth with topics like your video switcher and video routing, video encoding, and also just making sure that you have the right systems and workflows in place to have a professional live stream Sunday after Sunday. We're giving this course a complete overhaul in the coming weeks. In celebration of that, we're actually gonna be offering it at a significant discount for a limited time. So click that link below to enroll your team and get lifetime access to the training. Now let's move on to the next crucial piece of your live streaming system, which is the video switcher. As of the recording of this video, my favorite video switcher recommendation is the Blackmagic ATEM Constellation HD 2ME. The resolution on this video switcher is HD or 1080p, which I do think is still sufficient for the majority of church live streams in 2023. This switcher has 20 video inputs, so you could plug up to 20 video sources, whether it's graphics from a computer or all your various cameras, and then it has 12 video outputs. This is a sufficient input and output count for pretty much any church situation I can think of, and it allows for you to kind of grow into this video switcher even if you only have a few cameras and only a few output devices. And because there's so many input and outputs on this switcher, it also functions as your video hub for your ministry, which is gonna come in handy when you're trying to get various content to the various screens within your sanctuary, whether it's projector screens, LED walls, or maybe it's TVs out in the lobby that you want other content to be playing on. This switcher also has 2ME capability, meaning there are 2 mix effects, which gives you the ability to cut 2 different video feeds from the sources that you're putting into this video switcher. So right now you're seeing the multi-view for ME2. We use this mix effect here for what people see online. And then we could have a second ME for, let's say we want to control what gets sent to the projection screen in the room. So it just gives us really lots of flexibility for sending camera feeds or computer graphics or lower thirds, lyrics to whatever output screen or destination that we would like. If you want to see more of this type of setup in action, I'm going to link the video at South Fellowship Church where you can learn more about the benefits of having a 2ME switcher for a church environment. Like everything else in this video, I could talk for hours just about video switchers, the features, the capability, but to keep things brief and simple for you, this is my favorite switcher that I'm recommending for churches right now, the ATEM Constellation HD 2ME. The next most common tool I find myself recommending to churches trying to up-level their live stream infrastructure is a playback card for their computer graphics workstation. So what is a playback card? Real simply put, it's a very convenient, professional, robust way to send video from software like ProPresenter to your video switcher. And then from there, it can be cut into your live stream, or it can be sent to your screens within the room for your congregation to view lyrics, scripture, sermon slides, bumper videos, announcement videos, all of the graphics that we need to see coming from our ProPresenter computer. And the most popular route to go when it comes to a playback card is the DeckLink line of cards. Again, it's by Blackmagic. No, we are not sponsored by Blackmagic. We should probably work on that and get sponsored by them, because we're recommending all of their tools. But again, it's affordable, and it really adds a lot of value to the whole tech stack. It adds a lot of reliability. And the way it works is it's a PCIe card that goes into an expansion chassis. So basically behind this computer, there's like this little black expansion chassis right here. And there's the DeckLink card inside of it. It connects to the computer over Thunderbolt. And then from the card, we have SDI outputs that then go to our video switcher, or it could go to a video hub, wherever you want to send those video feeds. So the particular video card we're using here is actually the DeckLink Quad, and this has up to 8 video outputs. So what's great is if you have a computer, obviously, that can handle outputting that much graphics, you could output up to 8 different screens. And I'm thinking of like the content that you put on your congregation screens, your stage display, lower thirds graphics, maybe announcement content. You can output all of it individually, so then you can have those individual inputs going into your video switcher. And here's where you also want to make note of the fact that you have a lot more inputs being introduced into your video switcher, which is why it's great to get the ATEM Constellation HD 2ME, so you have 20 inputs to work with, and you have plenty of room for all of your computer graphics and your cameras, your live action cameras. And one of my favorite things about having a playback card is whenever we pull up ProPresenter, so long as the expansion chassis is powered on and plugged into the computer over Thunderbolt, ProPresenter automatically detects all of the proper video outputs. So maybe you've gone HDMI straight out of a Mac computer before, and the connection gets interrupted, and then the screens go out, and you just have a lot of headache issues because of that. Well, that gets eliminated when you use a playback card. So I highly recommend, if you're taking your streams to the next level, don't forget about computer graphics and use something like a playback card to make your life so much easier. Now for my final tip for taking your live stream from amateur to pro, and that is to use a dedicated encoder. This is another very, very common mistake I see churches make that absolutely sabotages the quality of their live stream. Maybe they've invested a ton into the church lighting system and into the camera bodies and lenses, so they're producing a beautiful image when you look at the camera inputs in your program feed on the multi-view and the switcher. But when you send that feed online, you notice it's grainy, it's really compressed, it doesn't even actually sound as good as the mix does locally when you're mixing it at your mixing console or your DAW. And it's a big problem, because it's like, hey, where did all this quality go? And then I go to find out they're taking their program feed from their video switcher and putting it into software like OBS, a free live streaming software, and they are just compressing it like crazy. And that's why there is not a good quality stream online when it's being sent to their viewers. Now, you're always going to get some additional compression online from social platforms like Facebook and YouTube, no matter how good you send them the video quality. But if you go with a dedicated encoder for your live stream, my favorite being the encoders from Boxcast or Resi, those are probably the 2 best makers of encoding options for churches out there, you're going to have a really high quality option with your own embed code that's completely separate from any of the social platforms out there. So if you're going to use the church online platform to publish your live stream, or if you just want to embed it on your church website, you can have a really high quality stream that maintains the video and audio integrity that you're seeing locally at the video switcher. So do not be surprised if you're using software like OBS and you're only using some random computer that you found lying around in your church somewhere with not enough processing capability. Don't be surprised when you see the quality of your live stream degraded when it gets published online. The other great benefits of using encoders like this Boxcaster or the Resi Ray encoder, or even a higher end encoder, is the automation feature. This encoder can fire on and off whenever we need it to at a predetermined time. So you can schedule your live stream to turn on 10 minutes before your church service that you want to stream every single Sunday. You're not worried about someone sitting there and hitting the go live button. It just happens. You just have to make sure that at that time you have whatever content you want on your program output for your video switcher. And as you invest in a quality encoder like the Boxcaster Pro or some of the higher end Resi encoders, you can explore using some better video codecs like HEVC, H.265. It's gonna be better than H.264. And I don't wanna get into the science of all of it, but basically the more power you have and capability with encoding, you're gonna be able to compress the footage in a more efficient way that's gonna maintain that quality for the end viewer. So do not overlook this final and very important step for your stream, getting a solid encoder. So that covers the 5 tips I have for you for taking your live stream from amateur to pro this year. Make sure you check out our online course linked below if you want to take advantage of the limited time discount and you want to have a course that has multiple hours of in-depth content to walk you through all the 5 things I talked about today in much greater depth. And we've had many students work through this course and build out a complete multicam live streaming system for their church, even with 0 experience within this field. So we're gonna show you everything that you need to know about every piece of the tech stack. If you have any questions, let us know down below in the comments. Leave a like if you found this video helpful. Give it a share as well, and we'll see you next time.